This video was recorded at the Spring Institute, March 2021. Our guest speaker in this video is Bassam Farah, Assistant Professor at the School of Business at the American University of Beirut.
My name is Bassam and I'm an Assistant Professor of Strategy and International Business at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. And my presentation will be about leaders with disabilities. So what I did, I took the term persons with disabilities and took out the word persons and instead put leaders. And now it's leaders with disabilities. And in my view, what do leaders with disabilities do best? They transform adversity into advantage. That's why that's the title. Okay, so the purpose of my presentation is twofold. One is to encourage people, to encourage persons with disabilities to become leaders with disabilities, to overcome barriers and become leaders with disabilities. And the other is to encourage researchers, disability researchers, to also do research on leadership or leaders with disabilities. So what will my presentation discuss? So at the beginning, basically, one thing that I didn't mention is that I'm legally blind, so sometimes I will have to look back to see my slides a little bit. Okay, so the first thing that we will discuss is definitely I will be discussing everything very briefly given the limited time. So stories about great leaders with disabilities or great disabled leaders, characteristics of disabled leaders, facilitators of success for disabled leaders, and then we will discuss leadership theories that have been used already in the literature in disabilities research and potential leadership theories that can be used in disabilities research. And at the end, there are the references that will be cited during the presentation. So basically, so anyone has seen or heard this quotation. So this quotation basically says the barrier to success is not something which exists in the real world. It is composed purely of doubts about ability. Seen or heard this quotation before or quote before? Anyone knows who said this quote before? Okay, so this actually was said by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt is the 32nd President of the United States, who actually was the leader who led the United States through its Great Depression and World War II, while for a big part or for a good part of his presidency relied on a wheelchair and lots of persistence. So this is just an example of a great disabled leader. Two other more contemporary disabled leaders or leaders with disabilities are actually Richard Branson and Steve Jobs, both of whom have learning disabilities. So Richard Branson is the CEO of Virgin, and Steve Jobs was the former CEO. So is the former CEO of Apple, as most of us know. So why am I mentioning these? I'm mentioning these just so that, like, to remember that there have been and there are always great leaders with disabilities that can be role models for persons with disabilities to learn from. And at the same time, these kinds of leaders with disabilities can be our subjects for our research. We can do research on these leaders with disabilities and learn from them and about them, about how they succeeded in becoming leaders with disabilities. So what are the most important, or what are the main characteristics of leaders with disabilities? So important characteristics of leaders with disabilities, as you can see, is that leaders with disabilities usually, like most of the time, do not passively accept barriers as absolute. They also they actually challenge obstacles, seek out alternate paths, and at the same time learn through challenges. How do they do that? With self-confidence, self-determination, adaptability, resilience, and positive attitudes. These are internal characteristics of leaders with disabilities. What about facilitators that facilitate career success for leaders with disabilities? These facilitators, there are three main ones, as you can see from this slide. So there are social networks, there are also role models and mentors, and at the same time, there are organizational and societal factors. So when we talk about social networks, these can be categorized into two broad categories, internal and external networks. So when we say internal networks, we're talking about internal to the career, which means internal networks are related to managers, supervisors, co-workers. While when we're talking about external networks, this is external to the career. These are friends and family members. So when we talk about internal networks, managers and co-workers facilitate success of leaders with disabilities in several ways. So by providing access to challenging job assignments, by inclusion of these leaders in work group activities, and at the same time by providing access to career opportunities. When we're talking about external networks, family and friends facilitate success of leaders with disabilities through basically fostering a positive disability identity and normalizing disability by positively influencing these leaders with disabilities confidence, motivation and focus, and by facilitating access to employment early on in careers. So role models, when leaders with disabilities are very well immersed in their communities, they are more likely to meet people who are potential role models who can help them learn how to navigate their careers and become more successful leaders with disabilities as well. When we're talking about organizational and societal factors, organizational factors include basically formal disability hiring like policies, disability training, workplace climate, and culture that is welcoming to disabilities as well. And when we're talking about societal factors, we're talking about disability legislation and disability social movements like disability rights movements. About the facilitators. I will talk about two categories of leadership theories that have been used in the literature on disabilities. So very briefly, these theories include transformational leadership, authentic leadership, situational leadership, and these are examples of papers, one paper about each one of these. What's my problem with, or my challenge with these studies? Most of these studies actually study abled leaders and inform abled leaders on how to lead disabled persons. What I would like to see more, definitely this is good. I'm not saying that this kind of research is not good, but what I would like to see more is research on leaders with disabilities themselves. So that's my hope. Some theories that have not been used so far, definitely this is to my knowledge, I can, but some theories have not been used yet or so far. Leadership theories in the disabilities literature are basically leadership behaviors or styles theory, leadership skills theory, entrepreneurial leadership theory, and this basically aligns with yesterday's session, inspirational leadership and servant leadership, and these are also the seminal papers about these theories. So then these are just the references that I used, and thank you so much for your time. I'm ready for any questions if you have any questions.
Thanks very much for watching. You can like and subscribe to our channel below. We're currently working on a British Academy funded project looking at the lived experience of disabled people during the pandemic. And you can find out what we're up to at tendproject.com or on Twitter at tendproject. Thank you.